Good evening and welcome to our virtual town hall meeting for East Zone Schools. My name is Mike Zarchin and I serve as the Chief of School Climate and Safety. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. At this time, I would like to introduce our presenters. Ms. Patricia Mustafer, Coordinator of Social Work Services. Ms. April Lewis, Executive Director of School Safety. Captain Brown and Sergeant Thomas, Baltimore County Police Department. Dr. Jennifer Mullins, Executive Director, Division of School Support and Achievement. Mr. Eric Wilson, Executive Director, Division of School Support and Achievement. And Dr. Kelly Rudd Safran, Safety Manager for the East Zone. In addition to my role as Chief of School Climate and Safety, I have the honor of serving as the moderator for our town hall meeting tonight. We have planned this meeting to be an opportunity for staff to respond to questions, provide information, and learn from our parents and community. We greatly appreciate you joining us. I would now like to turn it over to our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Darrell Williams, to share some welcoming remarks.
So good evening, Team BCPS. I am pleased to join you for this very important conversation about safe and supportive environments for our staff and students. I would like to begin with the Compass, our Pathway to Excellence, our 8-year strategic plan adopted in July of 2020. The Compass provides the clarity we need to support the academic and social-emotional wellness of each of our children. Next slide, please. So the Compass identifies 5 priorities: learning, accountability, and results, safe and supportive environment, high-performing workforce and alignment of human capital, community engagement and partnerships, and operational excellence. This evening, we will focus on 2 key areas: safe and supportive environment and community engagement and partnerships. Safe and supportive environments set the foundation for high-quality teaching and learning. We also know we need our communities as partners for this important work. Next slide, please. We continue with our efforts to recover, rebuild, and heal. While many would like it to be business as usual, this year presents unprecedented challenge. The Washington Post recently reported that this was supposed to be the back to normal school year. However, shortages in staff are creating chaos at a time when educators are already struggling with public health imperatives. The reality is that while we remain steadfast in our focus on recovery, the rebuild relies on tools and resources that are in short supply, requiring us to do things differently to meet the emerging needs of our students. Pandemic-related trauma experiences continue to manifest in an uptick of disruptive behaviors in schools. School systems across the nation are facing similar challenges as students engage in a prolonged adjustment period. I'll remain concerned about the safety of our students, added stress and exhaustion for staff, and additional worries for families. We have taken several steps to support our school leaders as they try to adjust the changing landscape. Every student deserves to be in a physical and emotionally safe and supportive environment. Baltimore County Public Schools is committed to providing access to a free education for all students. From day one, our school staff have been diligently implementing practices that promote social emotional wellness with a focus on fostering relationships, inclusivity, and wellness. We want all students to feel good about themselves, their school environments, and their ability to learn. This means all students. Chronic disruption and actions that cause imminent harm are not acceptable. Next slide. So on December 3rd, I shared with Team BCPS a list of actions and opportunities to help schools focus on teaching and learning. Those recommendations fall into three categories: community, resources, and accountability. So within community, this town hall is a good step in building the community understanding and purpose we need to protect school safety. Tonight builds on the system-wide conversations back in October and leads to ongoing and upcoming work with our PTSA leadership, student leaders, school staff, and colleagues across the state to problem solve. This is not just talk. It is the expectation that as a result of these conversations, we must take action. The resources. We are committed to deploying resources to proactively manage student behavior through lessons that equip students with social emotional skills, parents' tools through Parent University, and a new staffing model that assigns staff to high need areas, and accountability. Lastly, when our best efforts to ensure or restore community are unsuccessful, we encourage and trust our school leaders to take steps to preserve teaching and learning. Principals have the authority to use all tools, including bus suspensions, short-term suspensions, long-term referrals for board suspension, virtual and in-person learning alternatives to ensure a safe environment for all students. Additionally, school support teams will hold staff focus groups to address identified barriers. So there are no easy answers. However, we remain committed to working with all members of Team BCPS to tackle these issues. Thank you for your presence this evening, and at this time, I turn it back over to Dr. Zarchin.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Staff from the Division of School Climate and Safety work to foster safe, secure, and supportive learning and working environments for all students and staff throughout Baltimore County Public Schools. We work to coordinate multiple system-wide initiatives that support health and safety, as well as the social, emotional, and academic growth of students. Staff from the Department of Social Emotional Support and the Department of School Safety have expanded social emotional supports, engaged staff in positive behavior planning, provided guidance for navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, worked to engage students in learning, and partnered with other divisions as well as external agencies to enhance safety. Staff responsible for leading the efforts of this division include school counselors, pupil personnel workers, school nurses, school psychologists, school safety managers, and school social workers. Additionally, BCPS enjoys a strong partnership with Baltimore County Police, through which 83 school resource officers, or SROs, are funded and assigned. We share responsibility for each focus area of the compass, our pathway to excellence. The work of the Division of School Climate and Safety staff is strongly anchored in the focus area 2, safe and supportive environment. The key initiative that drives the work of our division include student and staff supports, positive school and workplace climates, safe and supportive environments for learning and working, and emergency preparedness. Strategies to provide these initiatives center around behavioral resources, supportive personnel, a multi-tiered system of academic and behavioral supports, social emotional learning standards, safety protocols, emergency response, and professional learning. Staff in the Division of School Climate and Safety work collaboratively with schools and departments across BCPS to ensure that members of Team BCPS contribute to and benefit from safe and supportive learning and working environments. For tonight's town hall meeting, we are pleased to have executive directors from the Division of School Support and Achievement, as well as our safety manager who supports the East Zone. Our hope is to provide a glimpse of some of the key leaders who provide support to the East Zone and are closest to the work. I would now like to welcome Mr. Eric Wilson and Dr. Jennifer Mullins, Executive Directors for School Support and Achievement, to share information on their role in supporting schools and fostering a safe and positive learning environment.
Thank you, Dr. Zarchin, and thank you, Dr. Williams. So my name is Eric Wilson, and along with my partner, Dr. Jennifer Mullins, we are Executive Directors in the Division of School Support and Achievement, DSSA, and we work under the leadership of Dr. George Roberts, our Community Superintendent. Between Dr. Mullins and myself, we support 64 schools, pre-K through 12. Dr. Mullins supports 4 of our special schools, and I support our alternative programs center at Rosedale. As we continue with our reorganization efforts through Dr. Williams, we hope to be able to hire additional executive directors to balance the load in terms of supervision between Dr. Mullins and myself. But we do it with a smile on our face, and we have grown closer in the process of working together with our 64 schools. Our main role in terms of supporting schools is, as you see on the screen, in the East Zone, it's supporting the academics, the operations, and responding to parent and community concerns that do arise. In terms of academics, our main goal is to support schools with the implementation of their school progress planning goals. We do that in a number of ways. We conduct instructional walkthroughs to monitor instructional implementation. We attend planning sessions at various levels, elementary and secondary, to assess teacher content knowledge and their understanding of lesson study. We work closely with the principal and their instructional leadership teams to monitor system-wide data points and, again, really hone in on the school progress planning efforts. And we collaborate with other school offices and divisions to deploy resources around instructional strategies and supports. In terms of the operations lens, we work collaboratively with our partners in the Division of Facilities and Maintenance to support our principals around facilities issues directly related to safety. They could be HVAC concerns, there could be issues with gas smells, there could be opportunities when schools have to evacuate the building. And we also will work closely with our Office of Communications to make sure that parents are informed every step of the way as we deal with some of our operational concerns that tend to come up from time to time. In terms, and one more thing in terms of on the operations side, we work collaboratively with our partners in the Office of Human Resources to make sure that all of our schools are staffed appropriately with a variety of differentiation models based upon the educational needs and load of our various schools that we serve and support. In terms of parent and community concerns, we really, and this is going to be our theme for tonight, parents, we really encourage our parents to have a very close, open, and transparent communication with their school principal, with their teachers, and their school environment. That's the best way that parent and community partnership works. However, there may be times where Dr. Mullins and I have to facilitate meetings between a parent and a school team or the school principal around issues with behavior, around issues concerning bullying. And our goal at the end of the day is to rebuild and restore that parent and school relationship. And also, we want you all to walk away from that experience feeling valued and feeling heard throughout the process. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Mullins, who will go deeper through the lens of safe and supportive environments with our work as executive directors.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Mullins, and I am one of the other executive directors in the East Zone. Providing a safe and supportive learning environment is the priority of every school in Baltimore County. As executive directors, Mr. Wilson and I support schools in achieving this priority by ensuring they are implementing a tiered level of supports for students. These tiers range from whole school to groups of students to individual students. By tiering these supports, schools are able to meet the specific needs of their school community and further provide more intensive supports for students. Many of our schools utilize restorative practices, conscious discipline, or positive behavior intervention supports as a first tier of support for all students. As they move closer to the individual student, supports may include counseling groups, individual behavior plans, and individual counseling. Oftentimes, the tiered level of supports include outside partnerships that have been created within the school. These partnerships can include agencies such as the YMCA, the BCPD, counseling and therapy centers, the Maryland Food Bank, local churches, and businesses. These outside partnerships are essential to the culture of schools as they offer additional support that is aligned to the needs of communities. We encourage you to work with your school to learn of the many partnerships they have available to you. With regard to the day-to-day operations of schools, the school system has a set of policies and rules that align to the Code of Maryland Regulations, or COMAR. Some of these policies outline processes schools must follow to ensure the safety and security of their schools and to keep compliant with COMAR. Our policies include topics such as community relations, administration, personnel, students, and instruction. When situations occur in a building, specifically around school safety and security, leaders refer to these policies to guide their investigations. Because of federal law that dictates what we can share, school leaders may not be at liberty to discuss specifics of a case, such as consequences for students other than your child, or specifics around an investigation that involves a staff member. However, they can share with you the policies they must follow, which outline steps they are required to take when situations present themselves. Lastly, our partnership with you as parents and community members is integral to our work in maintaining a safe and supportive learning environment. Oftentimes, we ask families to work with the school when problems or questions arise. Working with the school could mean reaching directly out to your child's teacher, the assistant principal, or principal, because these individuals are closest to the school. It could also mean giving schools patience, grace, and trust to solve problems, gather details, and communicate with you. School leaders recognize that open lines of communication and transparency foster positive relationships. With that, please understand that on a daily basis, teachers and administrators are dealing with a plethora of responsibilities. However, we as a system are committed to respond in a timely, transparent manner. As executive directors, Mr. Wilson and I are committed to supporting our schools, students, and families. Thank you for your support of our schools and working collaboratively with them to achieve our shared goal, student achievement. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Trish Mustafer, who will talk about social emotional learning supports.
Thank you, Dr. Mullinex and Mr. Wilson. Keeping in mind that the journey of social emotional learning begins with the vision in the compass, our pathway to excellence, that Dr. Williams referenced earlier, every single learning space where students and adults are acquiring and applying social emotional skills have access to equitable opportunities to engage deeply in cognitively demanding and collaborative work as part of a safe and supportive learning environment. It's important to have positive student-to-student, student-to-adult, and adult-to-adult relationships and connections that contribute to strengthening the resiliency of our communities. The information in front of you identifies how SEL is part of a tiered system of supports for all students in their lived experience. To the left, the social and emotional learning framework centers equity within 3 core competencies of relationships, awareness, and positive decision-making that are all essential to the attitudes and skills necessary for understanding and managing emotions, listening, feeling and showing empathy for others, as well as making thoughtful and responsible decisions, all of which is what we hope to seek in our communities. The document to your far right is Connecting as a Collective Community. This is BCPS's Social Emotional Learning Plan that's in alignment with the BCPS priorities and whole child approaches, focusing on the social emotional well-being of the entire school community. This document supports us in explicitly incorporating SEL into academics and behavioral health to build equitable systems of support for all students. The resource can be located, all of these resources actually can be located at the Department of Social Emotional Support's webpage and include activities that you can access anytime, such as the virtual calming room that offers strategies for all ages and stages to put pause and calm in your day, as well as the Mind Over Matters campaign that highlights the importance of social, emotional, and mental health awareness. So SEL is the opportunity to increase our individual resilience by learning and developing skills that engage and support the identification of regulation and coping strategies. We all have strong emotions, and we all need to handle those in ways that facilitate positive interactions. So let me just give you a few examples of some things that are happening around BCPS. First, I'd like to highlight Middlesex Elementary. There's been the establishment of mindfulness art. It's bringing together what's present and being mindfully aware, and art, bringing those two together in this collaborative, dynamic, and beautiful way to synthesize self-expression through art. It's one of the activities that aligns to our Culture of Care initiative. At the middle school level, at Golden Ring Middle School, students engaged in Mind Over Matters year-long social, emotional, and mental health awareness campaign where students are participating in learning and celebrating healthy habits aligned to the December through February theme of You Matter. And at the middle and high school level, students are continuing to engage in explicit awareness around strong emotions and accessing resources when those emotions become too strong. That curriculum is the Signs of Suicide curriculum. And it's really prompting students to take care of themselves, but also to access trusted adults when they need support. These are just a few of the examples of the great things that are happening to build awareness, relationships, and positive decision-making across BCPS. We are greatly appreciative to have all of you join us tonight. And we invite each of you to join us in nurturing your child's or children that you are familiar with, their social emotional selves by doing just a couple things. Model the way, show empathy, kindness, and be helpful. We are our children's first teacher. Find ways to give back to your community. Many times we think that this requires money. It doesn't. Sometimes it just requires your time. And the reality is, it is a fact that giving and doing with and for others, it increases our happiness. Use I statements. This is a really powerful tool. I feel and label the emotion versus they made me feel that way. It's okay to have big feelings and express them. It's all about what you do with those feelings once you have them. Also, we can always ask questions and be curious to support looking at the pros and cons of any situation. When you have a problem, get curious with your student or your child to move into that problem solving and helping to make a decision that works in the best interest of the individual. So what I will offer is that while SEL alone can't mitigate all of the stressors and all of the trauma that impact us and our children, we know it can mitigate some harmful effects. And so while we're navigating the instructional environment, you're navigating the communities that your child broadens and extends across. What we will say is that sometimes there is an additional level of support that you heard Dr. Mullins speak of, such as small groups and individual counseling. If you think that your child is experiencing stronger emotions and they are extending into how they see themselves every day and it's putting challenge into being able to learn, reach out to members of the student support team to help you and to help your child gain additional information on the supports and resources available at your child's school and in BCPS. Now we will hear from Ms. April Lewis, Executive Director of School Safety, and Dr. Kelly Rudd-Safran, Safety Manager.
Thank you, Ms. Mustafa, and good evening, East Zone community. So in addition to some of the documents already mentioned, the work of school safety and discipline is grounded in the documents you see on this slide. State law provides guidance under COMAR to which we are legally bound. Board policies and superintendent's rules must align with COMAR. These policies and rules include a range of activities across a continuum of prevention, intervention, and logical consequences. Sometimes consequences are in-school consequences. Sometimes they involve removal from school for short periods of time, and sometimes for longer periods of time. Each case is handled individually. Zero tolerance policies, which tend to handle every case of a behavior the same, were banned during the 2014-2015 school year, and BCPS made changes to its policies and rules in alignment with MSD mandates and COMAR. Additionally, permanent removal from a school is generally not permitted except in limited cases. And when those cases warrant that action, it does happen. The Comprehensive Safety Plan lays the foundation for safety from prevention, response, mitigation, and emergency management perspectives. The first 3 volumes of the Comprehensive Safety Plan are available on the BCPS website for public viewing, and I believe a link has been provided in the chat, while the last 5 volumes are only available to staff for safety and security reasons. However, the first volume contains an overview of the rest of the document to provide assurance to all stakeholders that BCPS is prepared to address a variety of emergency situations, often in partnership with other county agencies, such as the Baltimore County Police Department and the Baltimore County Fire Department. The Student Handbook, which students and families receive annually, is a guide for parents and students to assure their understanding of student behavioral expectations, interventions, and consequences, as well as their rights and responsibilities. Annual presentations by school staff are given to lend clarity to the document and afford students and parents an opportunity to ask questions. December is a good time to review the handbook with your children. You will hear from our Assistant Safe Schools Facilitator shortly as she highlights the partnership between BCPS and the Baltimore County Police Department to implement the School Resource Officer Program as well as other supports. The Guide to Safe Schools for School Resource Officers and School Administrators delineates the responsibilities of each agency, including how they pertain to discipline and criminal behaviors. All staff, as well as all of you, have a role in keeping our schools safe. Some staff have specific responsibilities for working in schools and or with staff to support students. Volume 3 of the Comprehensive Safety Plan identifies various individuals who have roles in school safety. At the school level, this includes school counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, and school social workers. School resource officers also serve on the school's behavior threat assessment teams to assess and respond to threats of harm to self, harm to others, and or harm to property. Pupil personnel workers work directly with students and families. We also have student conduct hearing officers who serve as the superintendent's designees, presiding over student disciplinary hearings, adjudicating cases, and administering extended suspensions and expulsions when appropriate. School safety managers are on call 24/7 to support schools. Dr. Kelly Rudd-Safran, the school safety manager for the East Zone, will share some of their responsibilities in just a few minutes. And of course, we have many community partnerships that support the physical, social, emotional, and behavioral health of students. You will now hear from Dr. Rudd-Safran, who will then invite our Assistant Safe Schools Facilitator to share more about our partnership with law enforcement. Dr. Rudd-Safran?
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I am Dr. Kelly Rudd-Safran, and I am the School Safety Manager for the East Zone. I have the distinct pleasure of working with all of the awesome administrators within the East Zone who work tirelessly to keep your children safe. As a school safety manager, I provide support and guidance to principals on matters of school safety. We do have some preventative measures that we put in place. For example, I ensure that all schools have an updated emergency safety plan. This safety plan provides a roadmap for how to respond to emergency situations. When an emergency situation does arise, we ask that you, as the parents, trust us and allow schools time to gather all the information needed in order to conduct a thorough investigation and to be able to respond to the incident. Another preventative strategy is we provide professional development to administrators and staff around safety topics. One example would be the updated protocols and procedures based on some of the things that Ms. Lewis spoke of earlier when we talked about the board policies and superintendent's rules. Everything is aligned with COMAR. We also have opportunities when we're talking about professional development. Since we do a lot of investigations, we talk about the best practices for how to investigate situations, how to investigate threats, how to investigate bullying, harassment, and intimidation. So we also work very, very closely with the Baltimore County Police Department and the Baltimore County Fire Department. We have conducted safety assessments for each building in the East Zone to identify and resolve any areas of concern. Some of the intervention strategies would include assistance with developing safety plans for students when they're needed. There are times when students need an additional layer of support, and so we make sure that those plans are in place for them. We make sure that when there are bullying, harassment, and intimidation concerns, if we need to develop safety plans, then we do. Sometimes we have students who are coming from different settings, coming back into the comprehensive school setting. So we want to make sure that there are plans for them to transition into the setting. We also conduct impartial investigations when needed. So as a school safety manager, I work very closely with the EDs, Dr. Mullins and Mr. Wilson. So I am covering all of the schools in the East Zone. I'm responding to all of the emergency situations that are happening. I also monitor the Safe Schools tip line. I also provide 24-hour service to all of our principals. I think that is key because I want you to understand that we are here to support all of our schools and all of our principals who are doing a phenomenal job of keeping your students safe. We ask that parents work collaboratively with us because that can help reduce the number of safety incidents that occur. Many times you know what is happening before we ever find out anything about it. So we're asking, when you know that, let us know. We can avoid so many different conflicts that may be happening in a school before it rises to the level where students want to engage in physical altercations. So please reach out to us, talk to us, let us know what's going on. And we're asking that you don't encourage students to fight because you're frustrated. We do understand that, but there are other ways for us to solve situations and problems. As a system, we've handled many threats of violence towards schools. We are asking, please monitor your children's social media. That is so key because if you can stop it before it even gets to us, then it will calm down a lot of things that are happening in the schools, because many of the things that are happening is surrounding the rumors that are going on and things like that. So it gets out of control. One of the things that you can do is if you see a post that is concerning to you, please call the police and then make the school aware. Do not repost it. Tell your children not to repost it, because reposting it makes it more difficult for police to be able to trace it and investigate. Let your children know how serious it is to make these threats, how serious it is to say that I have a hit list, how serious it is to make any threat to themselves or to others or to property, and the fact that we take each and every one of those threats seriously. We investigate each and every one of them. When we have those investigations, please also understand that that means that law enforcement may have to come to your house in the middle of the night to question your child. Law enforcement is going to be involved when we have these types of threats. So they have to question our students. They have to question you. They have to possibly even charge students for some of the threats that are being made. Your child is going to be disciplined at school, depending on exactly what the threat is and so forth. It's going to be arranged, which we've discussed. The other thing is, when there's a situation that is happening at a school, parents, please pay attention to what we're asking you to do, because it helps us be able to focus on what it is that we're dealing with. And sometimes when you run up to the school to pick up your children, it makes it a little bit more difficult because we have to stop to be able to get the student and make sure that we're releasing them to the right person and so forth. So we're asking that you work with us. We are letting you know information as quickly as possible. Sometimes it does seem to take a little bit longer. It's because we want to make sure we have all the correct information that we are sending to you. If there's a concern about anything related to safety, please work with us at the school. Call us, make appointments, come up and speak with us and let us know what's going on. And we are there to respond. Please know that when you do come up, know that we want to resolve the situation. So we're asking that when you come up and you're angry and you're yelling in the front office, and so that makes it more difficult, and that's causing the disruption. So we're not solving problems that way. So let's work together to be able to do that. Please know, without any doubt, we care about your children. We want what's best for them, and we do everything that is humanly possible in our power to keep your kids safe. At this time, I am going to turn it over to Sergeant Thomas, who is now going to share information about our police partnerships. Sergeant Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Rudd-Safran. My name is Sergeant Anissa Thomas, and I'm the Assistant Safe Schools Facilitator. I work with the Baltimore County Police Department, and I liaison with the school system. First, I want to start with our SROs. We have dedicated SROs, school resource officers, that cover all of our middle and high schools. Our elementary school SROs cover schools within their precinct area. We have 10 precincts, therefore our elementary schools float between schools within their area. Our school resource officers are instrumental in helping Baltimore County Public Schools maintain a safe and secure learning environment for the students as well as for the community surrounding the school. Some of the responsibilities that our SROs have is, number one, law enforcement. They are Baltimore County police officers. Therefore, our SROs were all patrol officers. That's where they all started. They all have police powers, and they are, in fact, police officers that happen to be assigned to high schools. They patrol the schools. They also patrol the areas around the schools. Our SROs are also mentors. They assist your students with several things. They mentor students. Students often come to the SROs to talk about issues that are going on in school, issues that are going on at home. We also encourage students to report incidents to SROs. If they see something, we want them to say something. And we're also thankful for our many students that have been helping us resolve some of the issues that we've been having recently. SROs are also responsible for teaching law-related classes. Our middle school SROs teach DARE, drug abuse education, and they also teach GREAT, which is gang resistance education and training, to all of our middle schools. Our high school SROs are guest speakers. They teach various law enforcement topics. They also have a street law curriculum, which talks about police actions. SROs often participate with other teachers and co-teach in American government classes. They also teach courses around child abuse, courses around consequences about certain crimes that are committed. And they also recruit within the schools as well. And they talk about the job of being a police officer. Students are always welcome and encouraged to speak to their SROs. SROs training. In addition to yearly training, SROs also receive 40 hours of basic safe schools training, basic state mandated training. That is curriculum that was drawn by the Safe to Learn Act of 2018. In addition to that training, prior to the pandemic, SROs were participating at NASRO, which is the National Association for School Resource Officers. There, they participated in a conference and received training around brain development, de-escalation training, responding to critical incidents, CEPTED training, security assessments, along with several other types of training and school-based training. Our school resource officers also participate in school-based training, such as the Safe Schools Conference. Our school resource officers also participate in other activities in the school. Many of our SROs are coaches. They help to coach sports such as football, baseball, soccer. They also sponsor certain groups within the schools when they are requested. Some of our SROs are doing this on their own time because they want to continue to bridge the gap between youth and law enforcement. After hours, just as was mentioned previously, many of us are working in conjunction with the Department of School Safety to investigate threats. Many of these threats take several hours to come to a conclusion. We often use help from our intelligence detectives, our investigative services team, our patrol officers, our SROs. We also work closely with the school system until we're able to resolve the issue and for us to be able to communicate with parents. As stated previously, please engage with your children. Please monitor their social media, as once a threat happens, it spreads across the county fairly quickly. Another thing that we'd like to talk about is we take these threats very seriously, as was mentioned previously. Crossing guards. Crossing guards are managed and hired by the police department. Crossing guards are there to help to cross children from school and to help to keep them safe. Whenever there is no crossing guard present, we do encourage BCPS to call the police, and a patrol officer will assist with crossing students. Some of the things that I do as an assistant Safe Schools facilitator, along with Captain Brown, the Safe Schools facilitator, is we serve as a member of the school steering committee, where we help to go over policies and protocols to ensure that we are giving input from the police department and assisting the school system. We also serve as members of the critical incident support team, and we serve as members of the behavioral assessment team. We assist with drafting safety policies and protocols. We manage the SRO program. We respond to emergency incidents at schools along with our school zone managers, and we liaison between the police department and the school system. Next, I would like to turn the program back over to Dr. Zarchin, Chief of School Safety and Climate.
Thank you, Sergeant Thomas. We greatly appreciate your leadership and commitment. Now we are going to move to our question and answer portion of tonight's town hall. As a reminder, members of the BCPS community had an opportunity to submit questions in advance, and we reviewed more than 120 questions. We are also going to answer some of the questions that you, the viewers, submit in the chat box. We'll do our best to bring as many questions as possible forward. For those questions we are unable to answer, we'll provide answers in the FAQ document that will be posted after this meeting. On to our first question. Our first question of the evening is for Ms. Lewis and Dr. Rudd Safran. A parent states, lately there have been a lot of school fights. What can your team do to assure the safety of BCPS students?
Thank you for that question. All of us are in partnership with you as the parents. We must communicate behavior expectations that are outlined in the student handbook. We have to work with students to resolve conflicts before they escalate and hold students accountable for their behaviors. Sometimes we hear that there's a fight in the school, and then sometimes we hear that there was an attack in the school, but there's a big difference between a fight and an attack. A fight is when both parties are engaged, and sometimes it gets, frustrating, because if both students are engaged in the fight, then there may be consequences for both kids. So please, in school, we're asking that they don't hit each other. If someone does something, then they need to let someone know. And sometimes that becomes a conflict when we're having that discussion with families. But please understand that when there are fights, there will be consequences for both students that are involved in the fight. Sergeant Thomas, you want to add something to that?
As police officers, if we do see student fighting, we do sometimes have to intervene when students are physically fighting. There could be charges for both or one student. We do have to investigate, find out who the aggressor is, and in some cases, both students may be charged. However, before we do that, we do speak with school administration. We also speak with the parents to make sure that everyone's on the same page regarding the incident. We review our body camera footage. We review school cameras to make sure that we're thoroughly investigating these incidents. There are also other things that we do put in place. We have conflict resolution. We sometimes do recommend or refer students to participate in that, and that is a volunteer program. So if parents agree to participate, then the program usually works well. If parents agree not to participate, then sometimes we just can't resolve the conflict. We also have our JOINS program, which is Juvenile Offenders in Need of Supervision. That's a program that the police department manages for juveniles who are charged one time. Typically, what happens with that is if the juvenile does participate in the program and they complete the program, the juvenile will not have a criminal record. So again, as Dr. Russ Safran has said and Ms. April Lewis, please ensure that you're talking to your kids about consequences around these incidents. We also have our SROs go into classrooms and talk about consequences when it comes to second-degree assaults. So please talk to your children and ensure that they're not engaging in these activities. Again, involve your teacher. If something's happening, if there's a bullying incident, you have the bullying form. Many students will go to the SRO to try to avoid a fight. And oftentimes that does work, where the SRO can intervene before anything even happens. And they even will work with the guidance counselor to ensure that the student feels safe and that the students were able to resolve their conflict appropriately.
And Sergeant Thomas, thank you for that last comment, because very often there's a lot of attention on the fights that do occur, and we have seen the videos that have gotten posted, very graphic, very difficult sometimes to look at. But what we aren't able to capture is all the times that a fight was averted because of students going to staff, going to the school resource officer to seek that support before the fight happens. And many of the incidents that we have dealt with this school year are the result of things that have happened in the community and then are getting brought into school, or happened on social media and then are getting brought into school. And so I think Dr. Rudd Safran mentioned earlier, if you know that something is brewing, please give the school a heads up so that we can pull the students and talk with them and intervene and prevent that fight from occurring. Very often, they happen before school even starts. Kids get off of a bus outside of the school, before school staff have the opportunity to intervene. So that phone call to someone, that email to administrator to let them know maybe that your child left upset this morning, that they've heard that someone is looking for them. Let us know how we can support.
Just really quickly, team, just to add from the preventative standpoint, our principals and teams, as Ms. Mustafa pointed out, are steeped in our restorative justice practices. So those class meetings that happen every morning or a couple times a week, those are so important to help build that relationship and that overall school climate of safety, so that fighting and conflict is something that we just really aren't going to pay a lot of attention to. We're going to focus on the positive aspects of our school environment. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you for that response. Ms. Lewis and Dr. Rudd Safran, another parent asks, how can BCPS expect student behavior and safety to improve when students simply are not being held accountable for their actions?
So I'll start that one because I think Dr. Mullinex alluded to that in her remarks. And so students are held accountable, but often people or parents don't know exactly what was done. And so sometimes there is the idea, if I don't know what the consequences are, or if I see the student in school, then nothing has happened. But it is important that we're communicating the behavioral expectations and administering the logical consequences for those behaviors. And so there are a range of consequences that schools can use in dealing with student behavior. And I think Mr. Wilson was the one who mentioned what some of those were a little bit earlier. But I see Dr. Mullinex has joined us as well, so I don't know if she wants to add to that.
I just want to echo what you said, Ms. Lewis, is around just because we can't share the consequence does not mean that a consequence has not been given. And also, if you see a child in school the next day, that also doesn't mean that a consequence is given. I also want to go back to what Dr. Rudd-Safran said, is excluding students from school permanently is not an option. That is not all students are entitled to a free and appropriate education. The other piece that I think Ms. Lewis shared was around, pardon me, the COMAR and following the law and what we have to follow that's outlined in COMAR.
Thank you. Sergeant Thomas, a parent wants to know how our school resource officers are utilized in high schools during times of violation of school policy. Some examples given are fighting, threatening violence with weapons, social media threats, or assaults on staff members.
Thank you, Dr. Zarchin. Great question, and we touched on that a little bit earlier. Every incident is going to be thoroughly investigated. If we have probable cause to question and charge students, then charges will occur. Each of those things that you mentioned, with the exception of school policies, SROs, school resource officers, again, are police officers, so they should not be involved in any school discipline per se. But if there is a crime that is committed, then administrators will notify students, parents will notify students, other students will notify police, other students can notify police. So any citizen has a right to file a police report. If there's enough information to charge a student, then a charge will occur. If there's not enough information, then it won't happen. But each incident is thoroughly investigated, and we work in collaboration with BCPS to ensure that that occurs.
Thank you. So we have another question, Sergeant Thomas, that you may be able to help with, and I'd like to ask Dr. Rudd-Safran and Ms. Lewis to join as well. What are your proactive plans regarding safety of our children within schools when it comes to weapons entering the building?
Okay, I can start with that one. If someone reports to us that another student has a weapon, which thankfully a lot of students do report to us, and we will go and get the student along with an administrator, and we will search the student. As long as we have probable cause for the search, meaning that someone mentioned a weapon was on campus, we will search the student with an administrator involved. And again, if a student is found with a weapon on campus, there are criminal charges that go along with that.
And for us, it starts with the communication of the expectations through the handbook. And so that is the proactive piece, letting students know what the expected behaviors are and what the consequences are for those behaviors should they choose to bring a weapon. And weapons represents a broad range of things that can be used as a weapon. Very often when we think of a weapon, we think of a gun, but there are other things that students can be in possession of that can be considered weapons or used in a manner that makes them a weapon. And anytime we suspect that a student has a weapon, we are going to contact our SRO or patrol to come in and do the search, because we do want to keep our staff and other students safe as well. And they are the people who are trained to be able to do the type of search necessary to recover a weapon, should a weapon be present.
Thank you. Dr. Rudd-Safran, a parent asked, what is BCPS proposing to deal with all the cyberbullying that's going on and the cause that cause fights and aggression in the schoolhouse?
Well, some of the things that we have been doing and that we will continue to do is going back again to what Ms. Lewis was saying about the expectations when it comes to cyberbullying, the threats, everything that is on social media. Along with parents, we need to make sure that students understand when they put comments out on social media, it does not disappear. It is there forever. We really need to continue to make sure we educate them as to what it means to be on social media. But at the same time, there are things that parents can do. For example, if you go into your settings on your phones, you'll be able to put on parental controls to be able to determine how much time someone is allowed to be on their social media, how long they're able, and who they're even able to communicate with. So there are definitely parental controls that you can use to monitor what it is that they're doing. Please make sure that you are monitoring. We have the firewalls in place in schools so that they're not able to get on certain websites and get on certain social media to be able to make the comments. But this is something that we all have to be able to focus on and deal with together as a team. But as soon as we find out anything that is going on, we investigate it like we would any other situation or any other threat that exists. We respond to them, whether that is online or in person, but we really want to make sure that we are looking at the education, the prevention, the response, and then the consequences that go along with that.
Thank you. Also for you, Dr. Safran, in response to your helpful comments earlier, a parent on YouTube has asked, how can I help my student defend or protect herself if there's a threat of violence and bullying?
Okay, so when we talk about defending and protecting themselves, when we're in a school setting, we have adults everywhere. So if there is a situation that is going on, our first response is going to be go directly to an adult and let an adult know what is going on. Because we're not in a situation where they are walking down the street alone and something happens. That's why we have the adults in the building. Let an administrator know, let their teacher know, their counselor, their SRO. There are so many people in the building that they're able to go to let them know what is happening. And then I've also heard students who will say, well, I told this person, they didn't do anything. Tell another person. If maybe they didn't hear you, anything could be the case, but please make sure you are letting an adult know. I tell students all the time, please, if something is going on, talk to your parents. And if you're uncomfortable, let them call us and let us know what's going on. But somehow an adult in that building needs to know what's happening, because that's the only way we're really going to be able to respond to a situation. If they are fearful of their safety, then explain to us why. And then that's why we have safety plans that we're able to create. That's why we have situations where we may need to switch classes. I mean, there are so many different things that can happen to make sure that a student feels safe. So those restorative practices, everything that we've mentioned thus far, we definitely need to know the information to be able to do something about it, though.
And thank you, Dr. Bud Safran, for mentioning that safety plan, because that is one of the resources that our administrators have. And what we've done with the safety plan is to think through a child's day from the time they leave home until they return home and what that day looks like. And if there are things that need to be put into place to protect a child, then the school is able to do those things as they consider the child's school day, their classes, the hallways, the restrooms, interactions with other students. So that is one of the resources that schools have in order to keep a child safe if they are the target of bullying in that school.
Thank you very much. I'd like to direct our next question to Dr. Mullins and Mr. Wilson. A parent would like to know if parents can volunteer in the school as hall monitors. Can you speak to the typical volunteer process and what that may look like? I know with COVID things are certainly different, but as EDs, maybe you can speak to some of the broader ways that parents can get involved with the school community.
Yes, so parents absolutely can volunteer. With that is a caveat. Obviously, we're continuing to monitor the COVID numbers and the metrics that are on the rise. So principals do have some discretion with regards to volunteers. So if their community is experiencing a surge with COVID cases, they may choose to not allow volunteers in the building at that time, obviously for obvious reasons, to keep their students and their students and staff and themselves obviously safe. But they could use hall monitors if those numbers warrant them. The process really is quite easy in that parents need to go through the volunteer training and get cleared. And once they get that training and they've been cleared, they sign in and they are able to volunteer. But again, it is at the principal's discretion based on what is happening in their community with regard to the COVID numbers. Mr. Wilson?
Right. Sure, yeah. So maybe an indoor hall monitor situation may not be the best entry point, but perhaps, working with the principal and supporting our students outside during recess could be an entry point into, some real clear support around volunteering in our schools. I know many of our schools do the Watchdog with Dads program, where many of our fathers are coming in, some during lunch, but a majority outside during recess, just helping to monitor safe interactions of our students. So it's really about the entry point that's going to make staff and everyone feel comfortable about you being there on campus.
Thank you so much. Ms. Mustafer, let's switch gears a bit and speak about social emotional well-being. A BCPS parent wants to know, what are we doing to help kids get strong? I think this is a great opportunity to speak to how we help students develop grit and resilience.
So thank you for that, Dr. Zarchin. It is a big focus to develop the resilience of individuals, but also the collective community. And the number one thing that we know that we can start with is hitting that pause. Just taking that moment to be intentional and disengage some of the stress. And there's a variety of ways you can do that are embedded in our conscious discipline curriculum, but also just in our 3 signature practices. And it's just a moment to calm the brain. Sometimes as we go through life, especially the past 2 years, the demand is go, 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 go. And we're constantly on that roller coaster of change, right? And adapting to the stress that's around us. The other thing there are a couple other things, but one of the other pivotal things that we can do to support our children in being strong is connect with them, spend time getting to know them, get curious, listen to them. A lot of times we talk about voice and choice. Help your child, help your students elevate their voice and choice. Meaning what that means is essentially hear what they say and offer them choice in how they navigate the world. We're only going to build the competency of our children by offering them the opportunity to learn. And many times that comes through lived experience. So those are just a few things to do, but then also continue to challenge kids to get curious and to think in collaboration with their peers. Sometimes we are quick, even as adults, we're quick to go to Google. And there's nothing wrong with Google, but really empower your children to have that conversation, to think through the pros and cons in decision making. Think through, what do I need to be aware of in this moment? And encourage your children to talk about that. Talk about the things that they're learning. Empower them to be helpers in their own learning, in their own communities. Earlier, we talked about give back to your communities. That's one of the ways to build your competency and your awareness is giving back, and it makes us feel good. Also, the other things that we are working towards across Baltimore County is continuing to offer students that opportunity to be engaged in how they feel, but also be able to express that in a productive way, to be able to talk to the adults that are around them. You heard Ms. Lewis, you heard Dr. Rudd Safran, Sergeant Thomas, as well as Dr. Mullinex and Mr. Wilson, all speak to the fact of enlist a trusted adult. If your child is identifying that there is not, they don't feel like they can go to one person, there are a variety of individuals in their school that they can engage. And that's all towards building their confidence and their competence to become resilient, to be able to navigate their environment and to bounce back when there's been adversity in their path.
Ms. Mustafer, speaking of some of our trusted adults, can you also speak to how we ensure that the social emotional support staff, such as counselors, social workers, are used appropriately so they can provide mental health services to students?
Sure. So I think that we have been really taking the time to commit to our students, to learn about our students, and really spending time to figure out what the needs are and how we can best meet those needs. That's all complemented by professional learning, spending time in problem solving spaces as a student support team, and really thinking through what are the needs of students. Sometimes we think that all we have to do is meet with that student one-on-one. What I would venture to offer to you is that's great to meet one-on-one, but children many times learn from their peers. They spend a lot of time with their peers and they are impressed by what their peers think of them. So while sometimes we think that we can only elevate things to that one-on-one counseling or that one-on-one service, we really have to think a little bit about what are we offering in that tiered system of support, either at their classroom level or at a tier 2, which is a group level. This has been prioritized with school administrators. There is ongoing professional learning that speaks to the need to maximize the resources that are available in the schools in collaboration with each other as student support teams.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the response. So we now have another question from YouTube. This question reads, what are parents' options if a child has been physically assaulted by another student at school? Sergeant Thomas or Miss Lewis, can you answer this question for us?
So if a student is physically assaulted at school, there are two avenues. One is through the school disciplinary process, and the consequences would be those that follow with the logical consequences in the student handbook and in our policies and rules. And then the other part would be if the behavior is deemed to be criminal, then charges, and Sergeant Thomas can talk about what that process looks like for students.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. So we touched on that earlier. If a parent and a student who's a victim wants to press charges, they certainly can come to the police and we will take a police report and we can follow through with charges. So those are the consequences for those types of incidents. Again, there's conflict resolution. Some parents will say, hey, I'd rather go to conflict resolution, which is fine as well, but we still will have to document that the incident occurred. And again, we talked about the Juvenile Offenders in Need of Supervision program, our JOINS program. That's an option that can happen if this is the student's first time getting or having some type of charge, then they can go through that program. And if they complete that program, there won't be a criminal record. If they choose not to complete their program, the case could be forwarded to the Department of Juvenile Services.
And Dr. Mullins, I saw you pop up there for a second. I was hoping that I can call you back and talk about what supports your team can provide in school as well.
Mr. Wilson and I spend all of our day, every day in schools. So we provide support in that manner, just being present and helping to coach principals through investigations and things like that. We also, obviously we have partnerships with all of the divisions across our school system. So if we need additional supports, we are really truly fortunate to have people like Dr. Rudd who are quick to respond and help support us in some of those situations. Mr. Wilson?
Sure. Dr. Mullins, myself, and other executive director team members, we always talk about effective processes and structures. So as a principal, your school is designed to get the results it's set up to do. So, do you have structures in place for supervision during transition? Do you have structures in place when a key paraeducator or an adult assistant is absent that day? Who's going to fill in that gap in terms of some of that lunch and recess coverage? When an assistant principal may be out, what are those processes and structures to make sure that supervision is happening throughout the day in a variety of ways? So, those are just other coaching conversations that we have. And I understand any principals watching will be like, Mr. Wilson, you know how it is with 11, 10, 15 staff members out at a time. We just can't cover it all. But just having that strategic lens of how am I going to approach each day to keep kids safe? I think that's just the first step, in mitigating some of these fights and violent behaviors.
And then I just wanted to add, and after that, there's the whole process of restoration. And so how do we recreate community when something like that has happened that allows our students to feel safe?
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. And I was going to share that Mr. Wilson and I are also active participants in that. So if we need to sit down and have conversations with parents, we are obviously available to do that. I know he and I both have students in our buildings that we mentor and check in on a regular basis. So there's another adult there to support them. So.
And Dr. Zarchin, just have to say, and I know, several of us had said this on the call tonight, just please remember, we are still in challenging times and circumstances, and our principals, our teachers, our staff members, they are doing the very best that they can. So that whole idea of extending grace, extending understanding and patience, that's really going to go a long way to the healing that Dr. Williams kicked off the meeting around.
I really appreciate those responses. Our next question, Sergeant Thomas, a parent on YouTube wants to know, with police brutality being such a common traumatic experience for many people, how are the police that are being deployed trained to ensure that they are responding appropriately to incidents? What are officers' racial bias training? What does that look like, as well as de-escalation training?
So we have a diversity and inclusion officer who was hired with the police department 2 years ago, and she has implemented training around candid conversations, around equity and bias training, and fair and impartial police training. So all police are required to participate in this training. Prior to that, all police officers received 2 hours of diversity training through the Training Academy. Several of our SROs also participated in equity training with the Baltimore County Public School System. So that's just to name some of our training. When officers participate in Safe Schools conferences and when they participate in National Association for School Resource Officers conferences, they also have opportunities to participate in some of that training as well. Most of our SROs have participated in the critical incident response training, as well as officers responding to de-escalation, which is a 40-hour training where officers are learning how to work with people who display mental illnesses, who have developmental delays, and people who basically have just experience different life issues. So several guest speakers come in from all walks of life, even people who may have had a drug addiction and was able to turn their life around as well. We've also had an autistic presenter at this particular training. We also have our behavioral wellness team that works with officers on certain cases, and they also introduce different training to our officers. The officers are required to attend a 40-hour state mandated training, and part of that includes implicit bias and equity training.
Outstanding. Thank you, Sergeant Thomas. Dr. Mullins and Mr. Wilson, from a DSAA perspective, can you speak to what additional resources or supports are being offered to schools dealing with increasing disruptive behaviors? And Dr. Rudd, Safran, Ms. Lewis, if you could chime in, I think that would be helpful as well.
I'll start. Ms. Mustafer shared information on her slide about tiered supports, and a lot of those tiered supports can actually come in the way of human resources, behavioral therapists, behavior support personnel that can actually work hand in hand with schools around specific strategies for de-escalation, specific strategies to keep students safe. So, working closely with Ms. Mustafer and her team to deploy those resources in our hotspots has been a strategy that we've implemented.
And I will add, one of the strategies that we have used is the huddle, and a number of us coming together to talk about a situation to support administrators in dealing with some very difficult behaviors, even of some of our very young students, as young as kindergarten. And so that team approach that we have used to support administrators to enable them to support students and provide what they need. And so I was happy that Mr. Wilson mentioned Ms. Mustafer, because I was expecting her to jump in with a little bit more about the tiered supports.
I would also offer that, thanks, Ms. Lewis, Mr. Wilson. I would also offer that we bring partners into the school environment. So we have partnerships for a wealth of things. And one of the things is when we're talking about adverse behavior that's impacting functioning, we may be talking about issues on the continuum of mental health. So really enlisting our community partners to support students and families in navigating that lived experience as well. I think it's really critical. I think through all the tiers of support, it's really looking at the communities at large and really embracing all the resources that are available, be it school counseling, be it our PPWs, be it our nurses, school social workers, be it all of the resources that we have, and collectively coming together. Ms. Lewis spoke about a huddle, but I really think it's bringing that student support team together to talk about how can we get really creative and support our students and our families as a team. And I think that's really important when we think about the tiered systems of support. Teaming, meeting children's needs, thinking about our partners in the work, our parents, but always spending time as a team really thinking through what those needs are so we can maximize our resources.
Thank you all for that response. Sergeant Thomas and Ms. Lewis, this is a hot topic that several BCPS schools have had to deal with the last few weeks. A parent wants to know, what are the legal and school consequences for making a threat to shoot up a school? How do these consequences differ from other violent threats, such as bomb threats? If a student demonstrates, quote, red flag behavior, such as graphic drawings like what happened in Oxford, and is referred to the counseling office, does administration have to approve before the child is returned to the classroom? If a child makes a threat of violence, would their locker or book bag be searched, such as a bomb threat?
So there are a lot of pieces to that question. I am going to ask Ms. Mustafer to come back to talk about our threat assessment process, because that is one of the places, one of the initial points of entry around an incident, gets reported. It gets reported to police for investigation, and Sergeant Thomas can talk more about that. But on our end, with these incidents, we are assessing what the threat is. And so I'm going to ask Ms. Mustafer, because her team is really integral in that threat assessment process.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. The threat assessment process is one where a situation is reported, and then they're under the leadership of the principal at the school. We are tasked with talking with the individual, speaking with the individual about the threat that's made. And we complete an assessment considering just what the intention of the threat that was made. Sometimes there are threats that are made that are just verbal because children don't have the expressive skills, so they may make a statement of harm to self or others. And so we have to weed through that. At other times, children make statements where they have the intention and they have access. So what do I mean by that? So they may have the intention and have a plan as to how they're going to carry out that threat, and they may have access to the ways in which that they could do harm to others or to self. And that sometimes is a process that we're all working in coordination together. We have the side that's investigating, perhaps if there is a threat that involves weapons, that we work with our partners in safety to investigate the access to weapons. But at the same time, we are going through a process of assessing the mental health needs to determine the level of threat that the student is to themselves and or others at that time. So it is a process that we go through, and sometimes situations that involve threats to self and others, we can identify that there may be a mental health need that prompts emergency procedures for us to compel further evaluation with our local partners at the hospitals in partnership with our police. At other times, we also enlist our Baltimore County Crisis Response Team. They are our partners as well, and sometimes they also are involved in that assessment process with us. So just speaking on that, we're all working towards ensuring safety that goes through an assessment process, but that is a collaborative process across the school environment led by the leaders, but in collaboration with many of the student support team members we spoke of earlier, including our SROs and our safety managers, but it could be our school counselors, our school social workers, our school psychologists. So just keeping in mind that process is rounded and involves many individuals. With that, I'll turn it over to the police and the investigation side.
Thank you, Ms. Mustapher, and thank you for the question. So we take these threats very seriously. They're investigated thoroughly. As stated earlier, these threats sometimes takes hours and hours of man time and resources. On occasion, we actually have to call in our investigative services team. We also include our intelligence unit. We receive tips from students, we receive tips from the tip line, we receive tips from the FBI. So we're constantly getting these threats literally all day long. Some of the charges for these threats could be threats of mass violence, could be disrupting school activities. We also have email misuse, we have harassment. Those are some of the charges that happen. Those are some of the consequences that occur when students are making these threats. Here recently, there has been an influx of these threats. At times, students are identified. And again, as was mentioned earlier, we will come to your house late at night. Sometimes you will have to leave work in order for us to investigate this threat. We will ask to search homes. If we have to, we will get a search warrant if needed. Just keep in mind that we are encouraging you, please engage with your children as often as possible, because once the threat starts on social media, it's reposted and reposted and reposted. And it's spread sometimes from the east side of the county to the west side of the county. It has taken an inordinate amount of time to work on these threats. But the question was, what were the consequences? And those are the consequences for these threats.
And in looking at these behaviors that are concerning, I think we mentioned earlier that our school resource officers are a part of our behavior threat assessment team. So they get the opportunity to review whatever behaviors have come to us that concern us. And if a student does need to be searched, the school staff only need to have reasonable suspicion in order to do it. So they do check book bags, they do check lockers, they are able, if there is a suspicion of child's behavior may warrant that type of activity, then it does take place. And if it is deemed not safe for a student to return to class, then we are going to contact parents at that point. And if there are people who are listed as possible targets, then those students are notified, as well as the parents of those students, as a part of that process. And this is for harm, threats of harm to others, as well as threats of harm to self, because that's another area of concern. And one thing, we've seen an uptick across the country in students wanting to harm themselves. And so I know a lot of our focus tonight has been on students causing harm to others, but we are equally concerned about students who want to harm themselves.
Great teamwork on that one. There were several questions there, and you touched on each of them. Thank you very much. Ms. Lewis and Dr. Rudd-Safran, we have another question from YouTube. What is a logical consequence for students who have had supports, restorative practices, and continue to chronically exhibit behaviors that harm others' ability to receive an education?
So there is a point. Dr. Rudd-Safran, did you want to jump in there first?
Well, no, I think we're going down the same exact line, because there is a point where if they're interrupting students from learning and they continue with the behaviors, and we put in place all of the other steps that we could possibly put in place, then it's a good chance that they may not be able to be in person for education.
Right. So they may be removed from their regular learning environment, as I believe it was Dr. Mullins said earlier, that we are obligated to provide an education for all students, but it doesn't necessarily, when it gets to that point, as you're describing, have to be in that school building.
Correct.
And as Mrs. Lewis shared earlier, parents, there are a variety of policies and laws and regulations that we are bound by. So when you think about removing an elementary school student, there really aren't a lot of options there, right? Those are our most vulnerable youngsters. So it does make it a bit challenging to figure out, how to navigate and reconcile our youngest learners.
The other piece that I want to reiterate, Ms. Lewis, believe you said it earlier, around zero tolerance. That is not a thing any longer in Baltimore County, nor is it allowed by COMAR. So a lot of times we hear this zero tolerance. It is something that we are bound by law to not do. So we have to take each case by case basis and individual students, look at the individual student, determine what is the next best consequence for that individual. So again, there's not one size fits all when it comes to consequences, because every student is an individual and has other things that may possibly be going on that no one knows about. So I just want to make sure that we reiterate that it is a case by case basis.
And to add to that, I also want to reiterate what Ms. Mustapher was saying around the fact that students sometimes have these behaviors for a reason. So sometimes they're asking for our assistance and our help. So we need to pay attention to that as well and make sure we're providing those supports for them.
Thank you. Dr. Rudd-Safran and Ms. Lewis again. This time we have a question about active shooter training. A parent has asked this question, is concerned about large classrooms, windows, and areas that could easily be breached, or seem to be areas that could be breached easily.
So all of our buildings are different. And in those cases, schools may use other options rather than the classroom. Sometimes they do have to move students to a room that can be secured. One of the things that we have done with our active assailant training is to have people consider different scenarios and where students might be at the time that an incident occurred and what their best options would be. Because with the active assailant training, it's an options-based type of training. And with our police partners, they are actually, and Sergeant Thomas might want to speak about that, going into our schools, especially some of those schools that are more difficult to secure, and that's where they're doing their practice. Sergeant Thomas, you want to speak about that for a minute?
In addition to using the schools for active shooter training, our SROs and patrol officers also receive this type of training at in-service every single year. So we like to use different schools because, as Ms. Lewis stated, each school is designed differently. Each building is very unique. So we do move from school to school with this training, and we include the precincts, typically the precincts who work in that particular area where we're conducting the training on that day. But SROs receive several hours of training along with all of our police every single year in service training. And they also participate in the scenario-based training that is sent out by Baltimore County Public Schools.
All right, thank you for that. We are trying to keep up with the questions as best we can here. They keep coming in. Ms. Mustafer, this one comes to us from YouTube. Where can the public access data being used to evaluate the effectiveness of SEL, conscious discipline, and restorative practices?
Absolutely. So there are a wealth of resources that speak to the effectiveness of conscious discipline. Certainly, you could look at, with respect to conscious discipline, if you want to know specifically about that practice, there is a lovely website that's got a wealth of information and resources there. As far as restorative practices, one of our partners is IIRP, and they can also lend you information around the effectiveness of restorative practices. If you want more information as far as BCPS goes, you certainly can log on to the Department of Social Emotional Supports and go to the Office of School Social Work and MTSS. There's a wealth of information there that can put you in touch with various resources in BCPS that can provide you information around conscious discipline and restorative practices and the continuums we use in alignment with our tiered system of support.
Thank you very much. So this is the last question of the evening from our community, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Williams, who has a question for us, to close us out with the questions. This one is for our panel. A parent on YouTube states, all of these things sound great, but it is clear that the policies and practices in place are not working. So what are the proposed changes and additional resources being implemented? Ms. Lewis, Ms. Mustafer, and Dr. Rudd-Safran, can you speak to any new programs, adjustments to practices, and or changes that we've made as a system in light of the traumatic impact of COVID? And what are we seeing in terms of student behavior? Dr. Mullins, Mr. Wilson, what are some new supports that you're providing this year that may not have been provided or provided at the same extent? So I'm going to open this one up to the entire panel.
I'll start. Some of the things that we are doing differently is, besides us actually being in the schools, as a safety manager, I am getting there, working with the principals and so forth. But the huddle is definitely something new that we're doing as far as gathering everyone involved immediately to be able to have those conversations about what support's needed for the schools, who do we need to have in the building to be able to assist, and talking around what consequences would be appropriate for students. And so involved in that is all of the people that are on this call, plus other resources that we have.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Dr. Rudd-Safran shared, Dr. Williams has charged all of us in the central office to work collaboratively with one another, put our heads together about what is our current structure in terms of support, and then what's possible. So I can tell you, parents, we have been meeting. We've been thinking about some really good ideas. It's just going to take time to consider next steps around implementation. But it is something that Dr. Williams has charged us to think about, and we've been actively involved in those discussions over the past couple of weeks.
And I'll add, one of the things we do is a lot of debriefing with events as they occur. And we do have our Safety and Emergency Management Steering Committee, where we are constantly looking at our procedures and revising them as they require revision, or developing new ones, because sometimes something will happen and we'll find that we don't have a written protocol in place as to how to deal with a specific situation, and don't want each principal to have to figure it out on their own. And so that's one of the things that we're constantly pulling work groups together to look at the concerns and develop the protocols that we have in place. Also, I have the opportunity to participate with safety directors across the state. And so we're talking to each other and problem solving with each other and bringing ideas from outside into Baltimore County.
Thank you. And I want to add on that, Ms. Lewis, as far as principals go, we really are working hard to empower principals to think about their communities and be creative with how they are dealing with these issues, reaching out to their parents and their communities to have open dialogues, have coffee talks, have information sessions to provide resources. We're also working right now currently to deploy central office staff to help support our schools, to provide additional resources, to make sure that we are taking a quote unquote all hands on deck approach to make sure that schools feel supported, they are supported, and that we're making sure that we're utilizing every single resource that we have in our school system to make sure that they're going into our schools.
I would also offer that one of the things that we've done with our funding sources is we've looked at the expansion of how we meet students' needs, be it through food insecurity, be it through mental health awareness, be it through mental health care, as well as a variety of other areas. But it's getting curious, but also getting creative to be able to meet the various needs that our students, as well as our families, are presenting with, and continuing to grow that and expand that in alignment with the charge.
And I think last but not least, I would encourage parents to engage with your children. Discipline and education starts at home. It does not start at school. So many of these stories that we're finding out when we investigate, oftentimes these are things that parents had no idea that their children was going through this. So it only takes a couple of minutes a day. I know we're all busy, we're all working. I'm a parent as well, but always make it a point. How was your day? What's going on in school? Let me see your social media. Who are you communicating with? All of that starts at home. We're here to support you as best as we can. You heard everything, tonight. All of the people on the call are very sincere. And as Dr. Russ Safran and everyone else stated earlier, everyone wants the best for your kids. We want a safe learning environment. Our SROs continue to engage with students. They continue to build a rapport with students. There are many things that our SROs are volunteering their own time, sometimes volunteering their own resources in the buildings that I don't know about, that we don't know about, but we do everything we can to try to help your students. We want a safe building as well. So just please engage with your children, parents.
Yes. And I just want to add the one thing that you said about looking at their social media. Have the passwords. Look at it randomly. Don't just ask them, because they're going to show you what they want you to see, but get those passwords, know what's going on, check it whenever you can. And please know that they also are making fake accounts. So pay attention to those things too.
Yeah. Just one more thing, parents. We want you to be a part of the process, but when you're angry and you come up and you don't give staff an opportunity to work with you, then that puts you out of the decision-making process. We want you in, not out. So count to 10, take 5, do whatever you can, so that way when you do confront the situation, you're giving us the very best that you can in a collaborative, civil approach.
All right, thank you all for the responses. We are going to give the honor of the last question to Dr. Williams. Dr. Williams,
So thank you, Dr. Zarchin. I guess at this point, I don't have a question, just a statement. I know we're running over time, but I wanted to just echo what the panel said. We have our policies and rules, but I did say to principals, I'm empowering principals to manage their schools and to be very innovative and creative. And we have deployed additional staff to be present when necessary, just to provide that support. But present tonight are our staff partners that are really working with our schools. And I want to say kudos to all of our school principals who are working on this matter daily. There are two other great partners and supports that we're going to continue to engage because they have a voice and they are great partners in the work that we do as a school system when we're talking about the home, the school, and the students, that triad. But one group, our student leaders, part of our meeting this past week or two were, that meeting involved our student leaders across the county, and they really wanted to make a statement and to focus on how to make our schools safe and giving our students a voice. And I believe in tapping into those resources. And another group we want to make sure that is involved is our local PTSA and PTO to support our schools. Those parents involved can help the administration to think about communication, programs, whatever that's necessary to meet the needs of that individual school. So as we teed up looking at next month, what we can do across the system and collaborating with other systems, I do want to encourage that our student leaders to have that voice, to make sure every student knows where to go if he or she is experiencing a problem and what that might look like at his or her school. And also, I really appreciate the partnership with our PTSA, PTO, and collaborating with the local schools to help problem solve. It does take this concerted effort for us to support our students and families as we have transitioned back to school 5 days a week. And folks are still dealing with trauma. But I have empowered the principals that if you need to take a different stance, working with your executive director and safety manager, you have some autonomy in making some decisions when you're starting to see certain behaviors happening in your school building. So instead of a question, I won't ask the question, I just made the statement. That collaboration is key. And we're very grateful for those who are present tonight, presenting. We thank our community for being present and asking questions beforehand and actually on the YouTube Live. But I definitely see that we're going to continue to make a difference because our principals and our school leaders really want to make sure their school environment is safe and that students are learning. And it's going to take that collaboration. So I want to thank all who is present tonight for doing the work and supporting our schools and supporting our school leaders. Thank you, Dr. Zarchin.
Thank you. And I too would like to thank our presenters. I do need to apologize because I did not manage time very well, but we had so many questions come in, great questions that will go into our FAQ. I do apologize for keeping you a little late, but I think this was time well spent. We mentioned several things throughout the presentation. I just want to touch on a couple. This is just the first of 3 town hall meetings this week. As Dr. Williams shared in his December 3rd message, there are a number of actions and opportunities that we're taking to partner with the community to ensure that our schools can focus on teaching and learning. One of those mentioned, you heard several times tonight, the deployment of central office staff to schools to identify needs, provide an enhanced adult presence, and to be there for the students. We also have the BCPS Student Council that is launching a new system-wide mental health awareness campaign in December this month. They are partnering with the Maryland Center for School Safety for a See It, Hear It, and Report It campaign that's coming in the next month. Now, there's also an upcoming parent university presentation on conscious discipline entitled Supporting the Social Emotional Needs of Your Child and yourself, with a focus on the topic of composure. Mr. Wilson spoke to that a little earlier. That will be on December 14th. That's a Tuesday at 12:30 in the afternoon. For more information, you can register or visit Parent University. You can also call 443-809-0365. Dr. Williams mentioned the Parent Teacher Association Council of Baltimore County. They are meeting in January to share resources with all local PTA presidents, with a focus on the role of the community and working with the school system to build safe and supportive learning environments. Local PTSAs will host specific school meetings focused on school safety as well. We will bring together leaders, teachers, support professionals, and community partners for a multi-district roundtable session. Participants will collaborate with each other in January to identify innovative solutions. So we're reaching across to different systems to try to share best practices and learn best practices that are taking hold or maybe showing promise in other areas. We also want to invite you to participate in as many of the upcoming events and activities as possible. Please continue to work directly with your school leadership teams. Collaborate, work together to come up with solutions, problem solve, not just for the school, but for the community and our families. Our partnership is critical and probably has never been as critical as this time with so many challenges that we face. I want to thank everyone on the call for your ongoing support. Please know we appreciate the teamwork. I want you to have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you all so much.